Human Rights Watch came out with a report in 2021, and it was not by any means the first organisation to say this, but we echoed what had been found by Jewish and Palestinian human rights organisations when we said that what Israel was doing is committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. They are systemically and violently discriminating against the Palestinian population. This is not just in their acts, but this is a policy of the State of Israel. One needs to look no further than the nation-state law, which talks about Israel as a Jewish state and the right of self-determination for the Jewish Israeli people exclusively. We then only need to look at the systemic discrimination that Palestinians suffer across the occupied Palestinian territories and across Israel. We see systemic discrimination in civil and political rights, those rights that are enjoyed by settlers and are denied to the Palestinian population. We have Palestinians now and hundreds that have been unlawfully detained in administrative detention without charge or trial. Children, women, and many others. We have land rights in East Jerusalem that are held exclusively for the Israeli Jewish population and not for the Palestinian population. We have, as we know, had a 16-year blockade on Gaza. And we have had the continual expropriation of Palestinian land, which is supported violently by the State of Israel. So whilst everybody is correct, all of the international leaders are correct, and everybody is correct in saying that nothing justifies war crimes, whether committed by Hamas or whether committed by the State of Israel. What we're saying is that there is a context within which this happened. And I think very, very importantly, and I think a lot of people, and this is why the determination of crimes against humanity, of apartheid and persecution is important, because for so many decades, and certainly this is what the State of Israel has sought to do, is see this as isolated incidents of violence, as you have noted, that come out of nowhere. And all of a sudden we are just talking about two parties to a conflict. And I am not saying in any way that parties to a conflict do not need to comply with international humanitarian law. They absolutely do. But the context within which this is happening is critically important, because the siege, the absolute siege of the people on Gaza, no water, no food, no fuel, no electricity other than a little trickle, is part of crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. This is the continuation of those crimes. And what we've seen from the international community, as has been noted, by Western leaders, is an absolute support of Israel in its defence. An absolute support. And while they are right to condemn Hamas, while they are right to call for the release of hostages, they have been silent, and their silence is complicity in relation to the crimes that are being committed against Palestinians. My colleague and I, Emily MacDonald, who's sitting in the audience with me today, we were writing about the situation, and we came across something so startling, which speaks to the hypocrisy of the international community. That the 8,000 civilians, Palestinian civilians that have been killed in 2 weeks, just over 2 weeks, is 88% of the civilian population killed in Ukraine in 19 months. And the world community quite rightly calls Russia to account, but has been silent in relation to this onslaught against Palestinians, onslaught that we are seeing against children. Every 15 minutes, a child is being killed. Every 15 minutes. That is how many children since we have already been sitting here. And yet the international community, and particularly Western leaders, have failed to call Israel to account. And not only have they done that, they have obstructed accountability at every step of the way. The ICC opened an investigation in 2021, and they are looking at crimes that have been committed on the occupied Palestinian territories, and they also have jurisdiction to look at crimes that are committed by Hamas and any other militant group. But they don't have jurisdiction to hear crimes, to investigate crimes that happened in Israel. Why? Because Israel is not a signatory to the ICC, yet Palestine is. And what has the UK and the US done? Consistently tried to obstruct the ICC and undermine the ICC's investigation in relation to Palestine. We've seen, as Taib noted earlier tonight, that the international community also has an obligation to exercise universal jurisdiction against war crimes and other crimes, including crimes against humanity. And Taib and his firm have been at the forefront of trying to ensure that that happens by issuing arrest warrants in 2014 and continuing. But what is the response of the UK government? The response of the UK government was to provide impunity by way of immunity to Israeli officials that come to the UK, special missions immunity. We've seen again that the UK government has failed to halt arms to Israel, despite the fact that we know that in previous contexts, UK weapons have been used in Gaza to kill Palestinian civilians. And again, thanks to Taib's organisation and thanks to your work at Bindmans, they are holding the government to account and calling for them to immediately suspend all arms exports to Israel now. So I think where we're at now is a very, very sombering moment for international law, for international criminal accountability. We're at a moment and a precipice where, as has been noted, when the world order that we established after the Second World War, will it hold or not? Or will the crushing hypocrisy of the Western world bring it down? And that is for them to answer now, because it's not just the safety and security of the Palestinians that are at risk, it's the safety and security of all of us. Because when they undermine the international rules-based order, they undermine it for everyone. So thank you for being here today. And as I said, I think very importantly, we need to think about the context within which this is operating. Thank you. I'll try and be quick, because I also know that there's probably a lot of questions that people want to ask. Look, I think essentially international law is made by states and has to be adhered to by states. And as has been said on multiple occasions by this panel, the international rules-based order that we know now was actually born out of the ashes of the Holocaust. It was saying, no, this will never happen again. And I think that it's also been reflected on, which is right, that it's these moments now that put the greatest strain and question the integrity of the order. And the integrity of the order lies in the equal application of that law, no matter who it is. And what we've already seen in these circumstances is that you will have states like China and Russia who are going to utilise these moments of hypocrisy for their own purposes. And obviously it undermines the integrity of any state when they say in one breath, like in the context of Ukraine, They are pouring money into the International Criminal Court. They are hosting events for the ICC prosecutor. And literally in the next breath, they are trying to undermine the investigations. So I think, what is really important though is, and I think sort of building on what we've heard in the panel, is that we are in, though, a new age. We are not in an age of Western hegemony. And that does provide hope, because what we are seeing is a rise of the global majority saying no more, challenging the former hegemony of the West, challenging the impact and the ongoing effect of colonialism across the world, and saying this is not just an international world order that's built for you, by you. This is an international world order that we hold. And we saw that just in the last few days. The Security Council was deadlocked because of, surprise, surprise, America would not pass a resolution that merely provided for humanitarian access, a pause in the conflict to provide Palestinian people with water and food and medical supplies. They wouldn't support that. And yet it was the UN General Assembly, the place where every state in the world comes together, that was resoundingly clear in their support for the Palestinian people and rejecting the crimes committed by Hamas and saying no more and never again. So I do think that while there is a real question of the integrity of the international world order, I think thankfully we're in a moment of shift, of power shifting, shifting between governments, away from governments to movements. I think we've seen the fact that the Abraham Accords have been fundamentally challenged by this is also because the people of those states, the people of Egypt, of Saudi Arabia, of countries across the world, are saying no, not in our name, to their despotic leaders. And their despotic leaders realise that they can no longer support what was a normalisation with Israel anymore. So this shift in power is actually, I think, the light for all of us. And it is the light, hopefully, for the Palestinians. So I'm not completely pessimistic, but I would say that these are the moments where the international world order is on the precipice of whether it's going to succeed or not.
Please.
I would just say, just speaking to the question of narrative, I think it's a really, really important question. And one thing I think we should not lose hope in is the fact that the narrative has significantly changed. And part of that, the reason it's changed, is because it's long-term. We can't only expect that we will change the narrative in moments of hostility, because we won't. But the work that, I must say, the Israeli and Palestinian human rights organisations have been doing for decades to make clear that what is happening are systemic human rights abuses and crimes. That means now, in this current context, that I think for the first time I have seen, certainly for the first time for the UN, to start talking about the context within which this is happening. We are no longer just hearing about Israel's right to self-defence. We are talking about the context of the subjugation and the expulsion of the Palestinians since the Nakba. And that is the context. And I think we should find hope in the fact that that has changed. It might be small, but it is very, very important. And the second thing I would say from work that I've been doing in the United Kingdom is saying, I think that politically the Jewish community in Western countries, the diaspora community and the broader Jewish community, have a very critical role to play, because they help to insulate political parties that want to speak up from claims of anti-Semitism. They are very critical for the narrative change and for the political change. And I must say, they have been, as Human Rights Watch working in the UK, our most critical allies in